Welcome back to the next episode of TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest, Scott Blake Harris, the managing partner of Crest Advisors, LLC. Scott has had an extensive career both inside of government, in a number of different stops, and outside the government. So I thought it was an important perspective on all of the things happening in TMT's world. Let's talk to an expert. Scott, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mike.
So let's start with your career and how you got to this point in your new advisory role. You had a number of jobs over the years. You started in government and went back and forth. That's a little bit unusual so many times. Was it natural when it happened?
So my career has been, I think, best described as a random walk, mostly guided by luck and sort of unforeseen circumstances. So I began my career as a white-collar and commercial litigator. I actually did that for 16 years. And then during the Clinton administration, I had worked in the campaign with Clinton and Gore, and I hoped I was going to get a job in the Justice Department because, after all, that's what I'd been doing for 16 years. Didn't work out that way. I ended up getting a job doing national security law at the Department of Commerce. The very last thing I would have expected. Until the next thing that happened, which was that a friend of mine became chairman of the FCC, a guy named Reed Hunt. And he calls and says, "Scott, how'd you like to come work at the FCC?" My response was the natural one for someone with my background. "What's the FCC?" He explained it, and I said, "Hey, don't take this the wrong way, but I know nothing about communications law." He says, "You know what I need is a smart lawyer. You'll figure the rest out." And he said, "By the way, you'll have like 200 people working for you rather than 16 people, and you won't be the lawyer." And at that, he had me. So I went over to the FCC in the Office of International Affairs and became quickly chief of the International Bureau. And I did figure it out, more or less, and I fell in love with it, most importantly. The thought of leaving the commission and going back to doing litigation seemed just abhorrent. So I stayed in the sector. I became a telecommunications lawyer, and the rest of it followed from there. During the Obama administration, again, I hoped to get a job in government, and I thought, after all, I would be in telecommunications, but then I get a phone call from the Secretary of Energy. How would I like to be the General Counsel of the Department of Energy? And I figured, well, I know nothing about energy law, but I've done this before. And besides, energy is more or less a network. I know about networks, so why not? So I became General Counsel of the Department of Energy. I loved that. Went back to the law firm I founded. And then in the Biden administration, I got a call and said, how would I like to work at NTI doing Spectrum? That sounded fabulous, and also was the first government job I was actually qualified for before I took it. And so I went and did that for a couple of years, and it was a blast.
Was it ever hard to leave the administration, or was it natural because the administrations were changing?
So I never stayed to the end of the administration.
So you voluntarily left?
I did each time.
Was it hard?
So yes and no. So it was easy in the sense that I found myself, after several years in each of my government jobs, burned out. It really was much more stressful and time-intensive than anything I did in the private sector. I'd work all day and all night, and then get up and do it again. And I would do it in holidays, weekends. And after several years, I couldn't do it, and I decided in each case to leave. Having said that, like 2 or 3 months later, having left the government, I said, gee, I wish I'd just taken a vacation because I very much missed the government work as soon as I left it.
Did you find one particular role or position, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector, that is head and shoulders above the rest, or do they all just encapsulate a career?
So I found something special in all of them. I think the one thing that is consistent through them is that in each position I tried to do something that had never been done before. So when the International Bureau was created, we opened up the satellite markets to international competition for the first time, and then try to lay the groundwork for what became the WTO agreement to open markets globally for satellite and other telecommunications services. At the Commerce Department, the first time when I was doing national security stuff, we began a complete rewrite of the regulations, the first one in 25 years. The Department of Energy, they had on their books energy efficiency regulations for 30 years. They'd never enforced them, which struck me as an abomination. So we began to enforce the existing regulations, which, by the way, Congress required, just had never been done. And then at NTIA, in the most recent government experience, we came through with the National Spectrum Strategy. So in each place I did something that was new, had never been done before, and I found that enormously exciting and fulfilling.
And does that explain why you switched from your private sector law firm to now a consulting role?
The truth is, I loved my private sector law firm, but this is something new. And I like to do things that are new and things I've not done before.
So let's talk a little bit about policy.
Mm-hmm.
You just came off a long stint, well, just been a little bit, but working on spectrum.
Right.
What's your take on the current debate as it relates to spectrum on Capitol Hill? There's a lot of moving pieces. Talk broadly about where things are and finding more commercial spectrum, the equities and balances with the government users. How did that process work in the last administration? And are you finding that conversation that you so delicately prepared is different now?
So look, there are a couple of things that are pretty constant, which is the private sector wants, and I want to underscore needs, additional spectrum access. It's also true that U.S. government users, DoD, the intelligence community, NASA, NOAA, use a lot of spectrum, and they have important reasons to use that spectrum. They have critical missions that have to be accomplished, and they don't want to give any of it up. So that's sort of a constant battle. And it's no different in this administration than it was in the last administration, than the administration before that, and the administration before that. I remember when I first got to the FCC, which was 30 plus years ago, and we were looking at these kind of spectrum issues, the first interagency meeting I went to was with the FAA. And I sat down at a meeting to have a cooperative discussion, and they started telling me planes were going to fall out of the sky and people were going to die. Yeah, I'd only been a trial lawyer before that. Planes are going to fall, people are going to die, oh my God. Well, you know what? 30 years later, we're having pretty much the same discussions. So there are some things that are constants. The question, and it varies with each administration, and on the Hill, is how much sway the various parties have, and that does change, but usually pretty subtly. So we, I thought, in the last administration, did pretty well coming up with a national spectrum strategy. We got DoD, the intelligence community, and all of the other government agencies to sign on to studying a variety of spectrum bands for additional commercial access. Our hypothesis was if you do those studies, there will be additional spectrum available for commercial access in a variety of bands, lower 3 gigahertz, 7 and 8 gigahertz in particular. And so those are still bands in which people are talking about. There are additional bands, which I think is all to the good. But it's the same tension, and how it plays out, whether the Department of Defense and the executive branch agencies move the scale a little bit in their direction more than in the commercial sector, that we'll see how that plays out. But there's a pull and take in each administration, and it comes out slightly differently. But it's the same process over and over again. One thing I would say is that having Congress do something is very helpful, assuming they don't do the wrong thing. I mean, it looks like this Congress is going to take the lower 3 gigahertz band off the table. That may have been entirely necessary for political reasons. As spectrum policy, there was no reason to take it off the table. I don't know what the end result would have been of those studies, but it could have come out a different way.
Is it the same conversation on 7 and 8?
So 7 and 8, we always understood there were parts of those bands which are going to be not really truly accessible for commercial service, particularly high-powered service. Maybe you could squeeze in some unlicensed or some CBRS kind of service. They're taking only part of 7/8 off the table. I think that is the part that probably would not have been able to be auctioned off anyway. So that may work out just fine.
And do you think, is that still work? Is NTA still doing those studies, or do you think that they've been kind of iced away? Was there a?
I think the studies we had in mind, which were very detailed and had specific roles assigned to different agencies, have probably been overtaken by events. This administration wanted to move very, very quickly, in part, I think, because of what was going on Capitol Hill, and they did more of a quick and dirty study, which was fine, which was scheduled to be done by the 10th of June. And I'm pretty sure NTIA met its goals. Don't know about the other agencies.
And what do you think is the end result of Congress's action? Are you anticipate that reconciliation is going to happen, and we'll have some statutory clarity on auction authority and perhaps how much spectrum to find? I
need to say, first of all, even though I've been in D.C. almost 50 years, Congress is a mystery to me. I really do not know. It's not for lack of trying to understand it, but I've come to believe that if you haven't actually worked in Congress, and I haven't, and it's one of the sadnesses of my career that I've never done that, unless you've actually worked it, you cannot understand it. I spent a lot of time while I was at NTIA doing congressional briefings on policy and what I was doing, and I loved doing it, but I had the sense there's a whole thing going on behind the scenes that's sort of above the rim for someone like me. But I do think there will be auction authority. If no other reason, then there has to be. Now, I've been saying that for a couple of years now, but I think pretty much everyone agrees. I also think that it appears that they've come to a political resolution, mostly in the debate between the Energy and Commerce folks and the House Armed Services folks and the Commerce folks and the Senate Armed Services folks. I mean, one of the things that has changed over the years is that DOD in particular has learned how to work on the Hill with the Senate Armed Services Committee, and the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee have in turn decided that they have a critical role to play in spectrum policy. That's new since I began doing this, and so the political balance on these issues has shifted a little bit.
One last spectrum question. The last administration was critiqued, and not by me, but by others, that the spectrum issues were slow, and maybe the NTA was slow on making decisions. Did you find that when you were there, or is that just a mischaracterization?
So I think what we did actually in terms of setting the table for these issues was extraordinary. I mean, because we went into it dealing with what I would say is disappointment from the Department of Defense, in particular, how the prior administration had handled these issues. And they were going to be more aggressive in responding to our efforts. In addition, in the old days, NTIA was basically expected to be the spokesman for the executive branch agencies. More recently, both the prior administration and our administration took a different view. We believed the role was to come up with the right answer, to be an honest broker between the executive branch agencies and their desire for spectrum and the private sector. Right? We were not to just be the and the executive branch agencies pretty much hate that, and they hated it while I was there. I'm sure they will hate it in this administration, and so that made the discussions much tougher. Having said that, we got the executive branch agencies to agree to these in-depth studies on a lot of bands, and some of them, right, not lower 3 and 7 and 8, but some of the other bands, they're already actually starting to have proceedings at the FCC to get commercial access to these bands. So I think we were successful. We might have been more successful if Congress had passed auction authority, but you know, the politics of that were pretty tough at the time, and I don't blame folks on the Hill for not getting it done. They came very close, but the politics were tough. So I think we did what was possible, and I think we've set the table for this administration. If we had not done everything we had done, the discussions that are happening now would be even tougher, and they might not be as far in advance. Also, they've yet to auction anything. So I'm just saying, right? So,
fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point. Yeah, you can't critique until you see how it plays out.
And I think they will, right? I think they'll get auction. But I think the critique of us was unfair.
That's right. That's understandable. Where do you land on the conversation of the success or failure or unclear record for 5G?
Look, I'm a regulatory guy. I'm a policy guy. That's really a business question, and I read what folks write about it, right? The 5G guys say it's an enormous success. Folks who are competitors of 5G say it isn't a success. As a business matter, I don't really know, right? I mean, one of the things I've always felt in government when I've had those roles is not our job to make business decisions. We should create an environment where different business plans can be played out by different players, and that all sectors of the industry can take their best shot. We weren't to be central planners, right? Is to give everyone a shot, make sure they all had spectrum. Personally, I love 5G, right? I use my phone and my iPad and my laptop, and it's way better than it used to be. Now, what that means from a business perspective, I have no clue, nor do you want me to have a clue. Not my role. But I personally love it. I think it's great.
Well, then flip the question, and from this perspective, as government officials, I've been critiqued. People have blamed me for overhyping 5G, and as a government official,
no one has any business blaming you. I'll just say that up front.
Well, you're trying to use the rhetoric, the platform you have to help make policy calls, and I've said to people, and I've corrected my time as I went along, what 5G could be used for. The use cases were changing as we got more experience, and we talk a lot more about manufacturing these days and private 5G than we do about remote
there's
surgery.
also fixed wireless access has finally taken off, which has been an important development. I mean, one of the things we've complained about for as long as I can remember is insufficient competition, right, in providing service to the home. Now suddenly you have fixed wireless providing real competition. If you look, fixed wireless is exploding while other sorts of home access are stagnating. So that's not possible without 5G. And did I mention I love connecting my laptop to 5G? I mean, it actually works. And by the way, I have a place in the country, a weekend place in the country. There is no wire to my house. There will never be a wire to my house. My house is in the middle of nowhere, and I have fixed wireless access. And I'm able to work from there and stream from there. And, that's great.
And I assume you're in the DMV area. Does that mean
the amazing thing is I am an hour and 5 minutes from where we are sitting in downtown. And I'm still in the middle of nowhere.
And is it part of the Virginia or Maryland department's office of broadband to bring fiber to your house?
I actually don't know. Which is sort of embarrassing, right? I mean, given that I was at the Department of Commerce and NTIA and all of this BEAD stuff is going on, I've never even looked to see where I am on the map. All I know is that I and my neighbors have no connection other than wireless. And by the way, some of them are using Starlink. I'm using fixed wireless access, and it works. Now, here's the truth. If fiber came to my house, I would be thrilled. I'm skeptical, even with the BEAD maps, we would be among the folks getting fiber. It's farm country, right? I'm a quarter mile from my next door neighbor, right? So, dragging a wire there, it's a thing. But, I was talking about 5G. Very happy with what I got.
If you were king for a day, the next administration somebody calls and says, we have a new role for you. You're now king of telecom.
Right.
What would be those policies that you think are the maybe didn't quite get done in the past from your International Bureau days, or what would you say is that, these are things that are
So
ripe?
look, I think it's the same issues, and I think they never get done. And look, there are lots of issues out there, and I don't mean to suggest the others like USF isn't critical, like BEAD isn't critical, but I'm a spectrum guy in the end, right? And I believe additional spectrum access is like the fuel for commercial and economic growth. And I think more spectrum access for satellites, and not just for satellites, for space endeavors, is critical. And I think more access for terrestrial providers and for unlicensed devices is equally critical. And so what I would say is that if I were the king for the day, I would have a laser focus on getting more spectrum access, both through technological means, policy means, that kind of thing.
Are there other things beyond allocations that would be helpful for effectuating spectrum policy? People talk about pole attachments or siting or...
So I think the last administration began it, and I think this administration will continue it, removing access to building towers and infrastructure and limiting the delays that are imposed by a variety of rules and regulations, whether they be federal or state, to allow greater infrastructure development. And by the way, if I can drop back to a prior life, that's also important for the energy sector, as well as the communications sector. I think there have been a lot of impediments to building infrastructure, and I think many of them, not all of them by the way, because I actually don't want a tower in my backyard, but many of those infrastructure requirements, regulations could be removed and additional infrastructure built out more quickly.
You talked about international telecommunications and your role at the International Bureau. Is the U.S. getting enough from the World Radio Communication Conference, from international fora? Are those old structures still working?
So look, those structures are, to come up with one word, infuriating, right? Because we have to go to the rest of the world and say, we would like you to do this. And the rest of the world can be a pain in the ass. Back in the day, the French made me crazy. Now this is back to the 90s. They're much better now, but the French used to make me crazy. But look, you're dealing with folks all around the world which have their own aspirations and have their own goals, and they don't always do what we want. On the other hand, when we are successful, we unlock enormous potential for U.S. industry, both service providers and manufacturers and everything else. And there's no other mechanism to do it. I mean, you can go country by country and say, please, we'd like you to allow an open market in your telecommunications networks. We'd like you to allow U.S. satellites to downlink into your networks. We'd like you to allow U.S. Cables to land on your shores. You can do all of that country by country. There are 165 countries. There is no way you can accomplish that country by country. But if you accomplish something at an ITU meeting, you get most of the world in one fell swoop. Not to say it can take a couple of years, which is irritating. Not to say it's always easy, but there is no better mechanism. What we can improve in the United States is how we handle these mechanisms. We are not as effective as we could be. We don't appoint an ambassador early enough because these ambassadorial meetings are critical. We don't have an ambassador till 6 months before a World Radio Communications Conference. That's a self-inflicted wound because if you're not the ambassador, you don't get into some of these things. We take too long to develop our positions. And if we don't have our positions early, we can't sell them to the rest of the world. Our U.S. process is tangled up in knots and red tape. We tend to have a consensus approach. Well, before you can get every U.S. player to agree on something, hell is going to freeze over, right? It just takes forever, and you may never get there. Actually, consensus is not a replacement for making decisions, right? I think the U.S. should make decisions earlier, should get its advocates in place earlier, and should approach the rest of the world as an advocate for U.S. policy earlier.
If you're giving advice to clients or others, should we be lowering our expectations for WRC 27? I mean, there's always this grand view of what may happen, and you highlight a number of problems internal.
So what happens depends on how effective we are. So I would not lower expectations. I would keep expectations high. I would advise people to get involved in the process earlier and to encourage government decision makers, I don't know, to make decisions.
It seems like a heavy lift sometimes.
It can be.
Turn to one issue that International Bureau in the Reed Hunt days and since spent a great deal of time of convincing the rest of the world for an independent regulator. And in some regards, that conversation is happening in the United States in terms of how independent to be. Do you have any views on that?
So I will admit that when I was at the FCC a long time ago, and I had to convince the side commissioners to agree with the things I was proposing, I had these fantasies of the Federal Communications Commission turning into the Federal Communications Administration and having one head, the chair, and then the chair could tell me what to do, I could sell the chair, and that would be it. It surely would have been easier. I'm not sure the policies would have been better, right? I had to accommodate the views to get, as did, of course, the chairman who made the ultimate decision. I don't want to suggest it was just me, but in what I was doing, particularly opening markets, putting up the first LEO satellites, right? Authorizing DBS, and that kind of thing. We had to make accommodations. In the end of the day, I think it probably made what we did better. We may be moving away from that because of bigger picture political issues and the Supreme Court endorsing views about the actual independence of independent agencies. But I think if they go away, we will lose something. I think in the end, we were right to suggest to other governments that they adopt independent regulators. Did not generally happen. I think it was one of our strengths. But it will be decided by bigger picture issues, not by telecommunications policy experts.
So the last administration split the International Bureau into this new Space Bureau and the International, I think it's the International Affairs Office.
Right.
Did you find that appropriate? Did it change your perspective? Does it give more prominence to space issues? What are your thoughts on the split?
So look, as an emotional matter, I was the first chief of the International Bureau, and seeing it go away, oh my God, right? It hurts the heart a little bit. Having said that, I think the Space Bureau is a really good idea. Space is just entirely different as an issue than it was 30 years ago. That's sort of self-evident, right? There were no global LEO systems. But we're not just talking about satellites now. We're talking about launch and launch spectrum. We're talking about manufacturing in space. There are folks talking about setting up communications networks on the moon, commercial communication, so that when there are missions to the moon, they don't have to bring their own communications. There'll be a communications network. That is so different than anything we faced 30 years ago. It deserves to be treated somewhat differently. And so I think the focus on space, they don't call it the Satellite Bureau, they call it the Space Bureau, is probably a wise one.
And what's your take? You mentioned a couple times LEOs. How do you view LEOs in the current environment, the debate over the validity of LEO broadband? Do you consider it broadband for, you have neighbors that use it today?
My neighbors love it. I think it is self-evidently broadband. LEOs, will always have, some constraints on capacity, but where the capacity exists and where they're available, It's actual broadband. I don't think there's any argument about it. I mean, the latency is excellent. You don't have great latency, so I think it's perfectly fine. And better than that, my neighbors who actually use it think it's spectacular. And I think the fact that we have Starlink is great. I think that we're going to have Kuiper is great. And the other thing we do with those kind of systems, right, is, they are by definition global. And so they have the capacity to provide service internationally that it would take generations for terrestrial networks to provide. So I think the advantages of LEO are just extraordinary, and the more of it, the better. And by the way, they serve government functions as well as commercial functions, and that's all to the good.
What's your take on what does the geo marketplace look like in 5 or 10 years? Does it shrink, or does it everything grow?
So I think the geo marketplace changes. Now, I did mention I'm not a business guy, right? I'm just a regulatory policy guy. So everything I say that in any way is adjacent to business decisions should be taken with a real grain of salt, right? Because I don't know what I'm talking about. Having said that, I suspect geos will become part of LEO systems. I think you're going to have combined geo systems, combined geo-LEO systems, because of some things they can do. One satellite can cover a hemisphere. There are advantages to that. You still have latency issues and all but they can be backhaul for LEOs, for example. Again, I'm just a policy guy, I'm a regulatory guy. There's clearly a role for geos, but I think what they do will change.
So switching gears a little bit, just on Friday from this taping, we had 2 commissioners resign at the same time and walk out the door. God bless them and their service. What does that do for the agency? Have you seen something like this before? Not in terms of people leaving. People always come and go, but in terms of the timing, what happened to leave at that precise moment. Sometimes they have pressure to wait for the replacement or something like that. I just wonder your thoughts. Have you seen an agency with only 2? I guess it's happened, but
so this was just weird. Okay, let's be honest about it. It was just weird. We both and everyone else knew, it wasn't a secret, that Commissioner Starks wanted to leave, and also folks knew Commissioner Symington wanted to leave. Not unusual, happens all the time. That they both walked out the door on literally the same day with relatively short notice and left the commission without a quorum. It's just weird, right? As far as I know, we've not seen that before. Now, the truth is, I don't think the impact will be that great. The reason I don't think the impact will be that great is that you have Olivia Trustee who's been nominated. She's gotten through her Senate hearings, and she's just waiting for a vote. There are lots of things going on in the Senate right now, which has delayed that. Originally, folks were talking about getting her done before the July 4th recess, but that obviously got overtaken by events with reconciliation and everything else. But they're still talking about getting her done before the August recess. So you're talking about going 2 meetings without a quorum. Not such a big deal. So I think that situation will be resolved soon. I don't see how they're going to get another nominee through, though, in any reasonable amount of time, which suggests that Commissioner Gomez is going to be in her position for a while if she chooses to be.
Fair enough. So you've been in government, we talked about earlier, a number of times, and your perspective, I'm interested in your perspective on the FCC. Is it not losing its luster, but is the relevance shrinking as the market changes, as government officials look at different things? And you both were at the FCC, and then also from a NTIA perspective. Is it?
The first thing I want to say about the FCC, which is different, is that everyone I know who has worked there, including myself, loves the agency. I mean, it really is true.
It's true.
It is different in kind, and I'm not sure I can tell you why. Maybe it's because of the independence, and so maybe it'll change if that independence is in fact eroded. But folks who've worked at the commission are devoted to it, and I am one of them. And I haven't worked there, to be honest, in 30 years, right? I left in almost. I left in '96, I believe. I love that agency. And I focused much of my career around the agency, not just because of the issues, but did I mention I love the agency? So I think that makes it different. I do think it will have to engage even more than in the past with the executive branch to the degree that it remains independent of the executive branch. I don't think its importance will diminish, certainly not in some areas. In the spectrum area, it will not. Whether it stays independent or not, that's not something I believe you can just say, we're not going to do anymore. I know some economists have suggested over time, oh, we just leave it to the market. We have to. I think that's like insane. So certainly we'll continue to do that. But there are other, the notion of making sure folks can afford internet service. And look, the communications network is the definition of critical infrastructure. And I think having an agency focused on that critical infrastructure is an important thing, and there'll always be a big role for it.
Are other policy issues that are not regulated by the FCC are you spending quite a deal of time on things like the hot button issues of AI or IP or a bunch of other things that are really?
I have not, in part because I don't understand those issues. So they are critical, and and they're going to affect a lot of things. So for example, while I know nothing about AI, I do know it's going to increase the need for energy, right, to power data centers and stuff. So I am involved on the energy side of AI, and so there are a lot of those kinds of issues. But AI and IP, you wouldn't want me to touch those.
Fair enough. Hey, I can't thank you enough for your insight on these interesting issues. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks so very much.
My pleasure. Great to see you again.